Welcome to Connect, Curate, Create, where we're on a journey through the arts and creative industries. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Butcher. If you're anything like me, you love learning about art and creativity. In each episode, I ask artists and creatives how they navigate life, work, and more besides. They generously share their stories and offer invaluable insights that you and I can put into action. As the author of Creative Work Beyond Precarity, I blend my mission to give artists a fair go with my academic smarts, to ask the questions that draw out lessons we can all learn from.
There's a lot of individuals here and there that say, oh, we need a union. But you can't just say we need a union and not do anything about it. You need to build from the bottom up, and a group of people that's literally what a union means. It was a really big deal to hear the Prime Minister and to hear Tony Burke say art is work and artists are workers and they should be paid. And Tony actually came to visit my exhibition because I kept tagging him and saying, come visit the show. If you think art is work, come visit the show. And then he actually came. He came to Coonahan Gallery, and then I showed him all the artworks and explained the issues through the art. I've decided a new thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, in terms of art making, I'm going to slowly make a bunch of work and then apply for a show, instead of the old way, which many artists do, is you apply for all these shows and see which one comes through. And then suddenly one comes through and you've got 2 months to make a full body of work and you're like, oh,
In this week's episode, I talk with Madeleine Thornton-Smith, an artist, educator and activist based in Melbourne, Victoria. Madeleine shares how her ceramics, education and advocacy practices combine. She offers keen insights into empowering marginalised artists to speak out against injustices, the power of grassroots collective organising, and being mindful of our own individual well-being. Be sure to check out the show notes for highlights and links that you can use to shape your own journey. And if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about Connect, Curate, Create. Welcome back to the podcast, and today I am speaking with Madeleine Thornton-Smith. Madeleine and I, we met only on Instagram just under a year ago, I think it was, and we connected over some similar shared interests in the politics of making art and activism in the arts. And so I really pleased to have you here today, Madeleine.
Great to be here.
Yeah, so Madeleine is an artist, an educator, and an activist, and so and this really plays through in your practice, right, Madeleine? So perhaps you could share with us what your practice is, its politics, and beyond.
Okay. So I suppose actually when I was younger, I was studying at art school, and I was actually studying painting. And there were certain things about the art world I found a little bit challenging. The art world can be quite exclusive, and there's a lot of hierarchy in it. And I was studying painting, but then I started doing ceramics classes at a community centre on the side, and I was really drawn to ceramics because it felt like it had a quite community kind of nature to it. I liked its literal and metaphorical kind of earthiness of the people in the scene. So slowly my practice kind of moved over more to ceramics, but a lot of the ceramics I make are about the hierarchy that exists in the art world. So I always think of when I was at high school, and one of my art teachers at high school drew this pyramid, and she called it the hierarchy of of visual arts. And she had painting at the top, and then sculpture, and then printmaking. And then at the bottom, she had crafts, ceramics, textiles, and so on. And I don't know if someone might have taught her that, but she sort of put that on the board with no irony, full seriousness. This is the hierarchy of art. And I still remember that because I always wondered, well, why are these other art forms at the bottom considered more lowly? Is it because often textiles and ceramics sell for less than the art market? Is it because they have more of a female-dominated community that makes them? Is it because traditionally these art forms were more kind of production-based, factory-based, working class kind of art form? Like I think it's all of those, a mixture of all of those things. So a lot of my art practice is looking at that tension. So for example, some of my works are making paintings and then making a ceramic replica of the painting. And then the question is it now worth more or less than the original painting on canvas? And the funny thing is when I try to sell them, it does feel like I have to price them lower, even though it's much harder to make a ceramic painting than just an original. Yeah, and I also look a lot at frames. I find frames very beautiful in how they're these kind of supports for the painting. But if you go to any traditional kind of gallery that has, say, paintings from 1800s, they'll often be in these beautiful frames, and we don't know who made the frames. Like these craftspeople, these nameless craftspeople made the frames, but we always know who made the painting. So that there's that tension too. And I often I'll make a frame without anything in the middle because the frame to me is the art. Yeah, so I suppose that was sort of looking at those issues and looking at the value of labour. I started thinking, yeah, maybe in a sort of mildly Marxist way about labour and where ceramics fits in there. But then getting a job teaching ceramics in the same community centre where I studied, that's when I started to become more overtly political, because a lot of the tutors, including myself, weren't paid or treated very well. So, that began my process of radicalisation, I suppose, more into activism, and not just making art about it, but being quite directly involved with unions and so on.
Your observations, Madeleine, I mean, the interesting thing I think there is that this distinction between high art and low art, and the fact that someone has actually developed a scale, these are pretty old and outdated ideas, but it is quite troubling that it still plays out today, that people who live and work in the arts, who would call themselves artists, still have these ideas of that there is a hierarchy, as you say, and how that must then play into the popular imagination, and so that when ordinary everyday people like me go to galleries, they can feel excluded because it is deemed high art. They feel out of place, whether it's class-based, gender-based, or other distinctions that are made. So, whilst in the arts we do, there are many of us who recognise that these distinctions are inappropriate and not for these times. They still perpetuate. So, going back to your keen observations to the start, really, it's what is it? Have you sought to understand why you were noticing these things, why these things stood out to you?
I think, well, to be a bit more specific about, say, these hierarchies, I should point out that it's more in the Western tradition. So there's different kind of hierarchies that exist in other countries. Like in Japan, ceramics made by master potters will sell for $30,000, a small little tea bowl, and that's considered the highest form of art. So that I think in the West, a lot of it goes back to the Renaissance period, actually, where they sort of developed this kind of idea of the heroic artist, your kind of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. And they still, of course, had a workshop with all these invisible people helping them with their paintings. But I think this kind of idea of the artist as genius, and it's quite patriarchal as well, because of course there were all these incredible female artists that didn't get the same recognition. But I think I studied quite a bit of Renaissance history at school and uni. I was trying to think, like, where does it come from? It's previous to the Renaissance. Art was, mainly the church was the main patron, and often we don't know who made the art, but I think that's where it began. And then there started to be a sort of divide between the kind of artisanal craft makers, because even in that period, say in the Medici period, there were craft makers, but then there were the fine artists, and then it kind of developed from there. So I think that's where it started. Yeah, and it is interesting that I think those ceramics is very much trending now. I think we do still have those biases between different forms of art, particularly in the art market. Like, even, like, I know this one artist I'm thinking of, her work is incredible, and she works in ceramics, but her prices just are never going to be the same as like a fine art painter, particularly probably a male painter, So yeah, I think we still, things are changing slowly, but we still have some quite traditional ideas about what's art and what is craft.
Yeah, and so very, very long standing, so over centuries. That's the thing is I think, as you've pointed out, and which I, as a middle-aged white man, wouldn't have perhaps picked up on like you have, in that, it's patriarchal in that it stems back from the original patrons of artists centuries ago, and how that still plays out into the popular imagination today. And so as you've said, you tackle this tension that you face in your work, and it sounds like you deliberately make art to actually contest the patriarchy, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I'll sort of there'll be little subtle signs, like a painting that's ceramic painting that I've done in pale pink, or quite a floral looking frame that I've made. But it is to try and lift up female dominated art forms. I mean, even like I saw a statistic the other day that said that 75% of art school graduates in Australia are women, but it's still generally the men that rise to the top and earn the top dollars. It's like a lot of fields.
And even within the arts and crafts movement, traditionally, if I were to think of key figures, they were all men. This is 150 years ago, and yet the people who are actually making, they're actually part of the production process. There would have been, there would have been women working very, very hard and probably contributing to the art making. To the designs that would have been made, and so on and so forth. So I think your notion of lifting up to actually make it clear, who's actually doing the work.
Yeah. And also, when I look at most of the ceramics educators, they're mostly women as well. So they're passing on the skills. And even it is interesting, even in pottery today, even as small a scene as Melbourne pottery scene, mostly women doing it, but there's just the few odd ones that stand out that do really, really well that often men. So it's just, I don't know what it is. But I know so many amazing female artists that deserve to do just as well.
So there's plenty of work still to do to unpack all of this, and and it is through you mentioned you use the word subtle in reference to your own practice, but there's great power in subtle critique. I think it's sort of and being able to if I suppose any sort of activism that is really bold and in your face, and it's not going to get onto gallery walls. It's not going to get into public spaces as easily.
To be fair, so a lot of my work for many years has been that subtle, it's a cast of a painting, and I have to explain to people because sometimes they just think it's a real painting because it looks exactly the same unless you look at like the material list. But yeah, last year when I curated this exhibition that was about artists' labour, and I had some of my own work in it. I made work that was not subtle. I didn't want it to be subtle, so it had loaded words on it, like real job and hobby and patron, but like there was a lot of thinking about the words I would use, and there's sometimes there were sort of puns and but I thought, is this too didactic? I'm so used to it being subtle, but I really wanted to make a strong point. So yeah, sometimes my work's less subtle.
Awesome, and perhaps that's indicative of how you are finding your own voice, perhaps, and strengthening your voice. Maybe gaining support for your work, getting more patronage. As you're speaking, I'm thinking of artists I can think of who use those historical references, go back to an earlier period in art when working class artists began to make art that was of and for ordinary everyday people, I suppose, not just for the gentry and a certain class. And so I suppose that speaks to the question of who are we making art for, really, in this contemporary age when we see large institutions rolling out red carpets for huge events and glorifying or if you like, not glorifying, but valorizing notions of high art. That for me is problematic in that it speaks to a market dynamic in that. It purposely plays into a market dynamic, one of seeking attention and gaining attention through glitz and glamour when there are so many hardworking artists out there. So beyond all of that, beyond that world that we are not necessarily part of, and neither would we want to be. What is going on on the ground? What is happening at a grassroots level to really bring different practices forward, like your own?
I suppose one thing I think I might have mentioned before about the ceramics community I quite like, as opposed to the wider fine arts scene, is it is quite, just that like grassroots based. You see a lot of exhibitions of people together of all different kind of levels. You can always access ceramics through markets as well. Like when I go to markets, you buy beautiful bowls and cups and things, and I just think of it as being an affordable way to buy art. Like I think of like these, we call it like functional ceramics that you can use. I just think of them also as art. So I have this, big collection of 50 or 60 ceramic beakers, and to me that's like my art collection, because I can't afford much, but artists can afford pottery. So that's something I really like about ceramics and other craft art forms, the accessibility. Though it has become lately so accessible. So I don't know if you've noticed on Instagram, but ceramics in particular is just booming. It's just, at least in Melbourne, I know there's so many new studios opening up everywhere. And I think social media has something to do with it. It's sort of been like glamorized, and people can, reach these huge follower counts through promoting themselves online. But that's one thing which I think is a good and a bad thing, because another area that I really focus on is sort of advocacy in terms of the workers that work in these studios. So they're popping up everywhere, but often they're run by people that don't know how to legally run a business, or if they do, they choose not to run it properly. I've talked to a lot of, say, all sorts of makers. Either they're literally like production workers, they're making pots in a small studio, or they're teaching ceramics, or they're kiln technicians or studio technicians, and they're all of those jobs are really actually quite traditional jobs. Like you think of being a fine artist, it's sort of harder to define, how you get paid and how you compare it to other types of work. But if you're working in a studio, that's just a job. You're working cleaning the floor 8 hours a day or whatever. So unfortunately, through my research and activism in this area, because I experienced poor working conditions myself, a lot of people, particularly young women, aren't getting paid or treated properly. So that's something that I suppose if you consider my advocacy part of my practice, something that I'm always like speaking to people about and writing about. And
yeah. So you're an educator as well. You teach ceramics. Would I be right? And so your work as an educator, how does that intersect with these tensions that you're experiencing?
So I suppose it goes back. It was almost 10 years ago now. I got a little job at a community centre teaching, and I thought when I interviewed for the job, it was a job. Like I thought I was getting a casual job, but I was asked to get an ABN and show them that I had insurance. And this was a council-run facility. And I just thought that was really weird. And then they said, then you invoice us this much. And then even if I was held back for 40 minutes cleaning up, they said, you're only allowed to invoice this much. And I just thought I'd had all sorts of jobs, retail, hospo, worked in a supermarket, worked as a disability carer. All of those jobs had their problems, but they were all real jobs. Like they were all on the payroll with super and that, on an award or an EBA. So I started asking questions. I started sort of thinking, what's this? And I worked out it was something called sham contracting, which is just, it's sort of like, if you think about how that sort of Uber says, you're running your own business, through your car, but really they call the shots, and really they're sort of more like employees. So, and then I did a well, first of all, I fought and got myself onto the payroll. It was a pretty difficult fight. But then I thought I really want to try and help people that have gone through what I've gone through. And I did a call out, have you experienced this as well? And got about 100 people contacting on my Instagram or just messaging me, yes, I work here. And that was really overwhelming, actually. And everyone wanted me to kind of to fight for them, but I'm just one person that was doing some research, and then I think from there I became more involved with more active advocacy in that space.
Yeah, certainly. What I've seen of things you've discussed openly on Instagram, for example, very much you do take a lead yourself, and so I guess it's understandable that if you reach out to others and then they're going to look to you for leadership, because these are things that aren't easy to talk about out in the open, are they? And so it needs a movement, but then it needs people to lead that movement. So how have you seen your advocacy work develop since that time? Are there broader groups that come together? What are the ways that you actually mobilize?
Well, I was for a period of time a few years ago in a collective, and we were called the Artists Union, and we were discussing, can we create a union? Because visual artists, unlike many other arts workers, don't have formal representation in any unions, visual arts workers. And we were discussing it, and we created a kind of index of, in other countries, what have they done, and we still have this index. It's called the Art Organising Index. Sadly, that sort of, we started just for the pandemic, but I'm still in contact with those people, and a lot of those people were in this exhibition I put together last year. But it's a bit hard, because there's a lot of individuals here and there that say, oh, we need a union, but you can't just say we need a union and not do anything about it. You need to build from the bottom up, and a group of people that's literally what a union means. One thing that's been difficult is the arts union, which is called MIA, where I'm actually, I have a lot of respect for them, because I interned with them a few years ago, but they're very resistant to taking on visual arts workers. So that it would be much easier if we could join with an existing union. And then NAVA, which is the National Association for Visual Arts, they've said, look, we would be willing to even sort of join with MIA to somehow cover visual artists, but then MIA are difficult. It's a lot of politics.
It's always interesting how no one ever wants to make the first move when it's something so important. And I suppose the other thing is the other, as you're talking there, going back to a fundamental issue of us all being so individualized, that that foundational experience that you had, where you were through a sham contract, they expected you to be an independent freelance worker, and it's just so normalized now in and across the arts that the idea of being part of a workers' collective, being part of a union, is always going to be really difficult to achieve, in that we've lost that sense of collectivism more generally. And, that's reflected across all industry sectors. The union membership is down across all sectors across the world, So it is the ideology that is so dominant in our world today that is achieving that. It's achieving the goals, those particular goals it's set out to achieve. And so I suppose in a world where we are individualized, any form of collectivism is going to be powerful. So you mentioned they're curating an exhibition, and so the simple act, or the straightforward, non-confrontational act of curating an exhibition of like-minded people, that holds huge power. Again, back to the idea of subtlety, I guess. It's so. Do you see curation as part of your advocacy work, as part of your practice, or is it just coincidental? Am I making connections that don't exist?
No, that's correct. So a few years ago, I wrote an article, and I'd started making a series of these plaques, like I mentioned before, with sort of loaded words related to labour on them, mostly to channel my frustration about these issues. I wrote an article for the Journal of Australian Ceramics called Real Job. And then I thought I started pitching it as a show idea to a few different galleries, and it's getting knocked back. And then I thought, look, it's not just my issue. This is a collective issue. Maybe I should re-pitch this as a group show that I put together. And I went a little bit crazy and made it into this 2-part show with 16 artists across 2 galleries. And it was, with all this public programming and everything, it was really, because I was just so excited about it. And I did see it as a form of organising and as a form of advocacy. And I honestly just wanted to meet other artists that thought like me as well. So there's a really great collective called the Workers' Art Collective. And they don't make work specifically just about artist labour, but about union issues and political issues in general. And so a few of them were in the show, and then a few of the people from that collective, the Artists Union, were in it. Maybe even for kind of selfish reasons. I just thought I just want to meet more people that think like me, because I do find artists, and it's not our fault. It's sort of the way we've been brought up through art school or through the art market. With a lot of artists think very individualistically, and it's actually very isolating. And I just wanted to sort of build a bit of community and momentum around talking about these issues. So I created an Instagram page for it, and I still have the page, and I still post things related to artist labour, and I want to continue doing that. I did get extremely tired last year, so it slowed down for a bit. But and I still am involved in lots of little advocacy things here and there. But I do, I'm really sad that the little collective I was in is no longer going, because they were all such amazing people. But everyone just kind of got burnt out.
You've just hit on a really key point there. So your own, you said you got tired last year. People get burnt out. When you are in a struggle and you are constantly struggling against something else, it's going to weigh you down, and that is how that dominant ideology works. It doesn't say stop; it just says, "Come on, keep coming until you get tired," and then you just reach a point where it's, oh wow, I just can't do this anymore, and then it wins. And so finding ways to manage your own well-being is so important. So I just wonder, what do you do? How do you keep going with this, and how do you take a break from it when you need to, and so on?
I have, so even before I did that show last year, I have this tendency to take way too much on for a period of time, whether it be applying for multiple shows at once, working multiple jobs. Then I crash, then I, rest for a bit, claw myself out, do it again. Even before Real Job, the exhibition, I was thinking that 6 months before it, I was working 5 jobs. Like 2 of them were like ongoing jobs and the others were like all these temporary jobs that came up. And I worked all those jobs so that I could then go on a residency, and it's like you work yourself to the bone so you then can just go overseas for a little bit and calm down. But I realized, I think after last year, I maybe got more burnt out than I have ever gotten. And it doesn't mean I don't regret that show at all. Like, I'm really proud of myself and proud of all the artists, but I'm just slowing down a lot. I've decided a new thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, in terms of art making, I'm going to slowly make a bunch of work and then apply for a show instead of the old way, which many artists do, is you apply for all these shows and see which one comes through. And then suddenly one comes through and you've got 2 months to make a full body of work. And you're like, oh, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to make the work. And then, so just stripping back a bit. But it is hard, like you're saying with the burnout. There's all this advocacy stuff for the most part, I do unpaid. And I myself am a precarious worker. Like I just get these little dribs and drabs of work. So I'm just being a little bit less hard on myself. If there's a problem that really upsets me, I don't have to think I'm the one that has to solve it. Like sham contracting, all the sham contracted workers in Australia who don't have anyone to go to, I don't have to solve it for everyone. But I do still get people, even just the other day, there was a woman that was emailing me for some advice that I have all the information built up now because I've already helped a lot of people. But then you get like really nice emails, like one person emailed through and said, oh, thanks for that help you gave me. I've got 10 years back pay of superannuation from the information you sent through from the ATO or whatever. And then I'm like, oh, okay. That makes it feel worth it. So I guess that's a very long-winded answer, but yeah, to summarize, I'm just taking a bit slower and not feeling as an individual like you have to solve the world's problems. Because that's against the collective mindset anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and it does. It goes back again to notions of patriarchy and so on. In that, individually we feel we need to solve these problems, to step up, but I think what we have now in this day and age is different ways of connecting together that haven't existed before, have existed in different forms, where the sharing of information and the sharing of stories and experiences, and then being able to bring them to a fore on appropriate platforms is so key. So rather than one person speaking out for everyone or leading the way, that can only lead to burnout. But how can we use these tools we have today to, digital communication tools, how can we use these to bring people together in ways we've not done before? And I think there are good examples out there in the world of different movements that have formed through digital connections and leveraging social media and so on. And, I suppose, but it just doesn't seem to take off in the arts. So there still feels to me like there is something that is holding arts workers back from speaking out. As I say, I think it's a conundrum that can be unpacked. We just haven't figured out how to yet. Look, I really like what you just said about how you have all that information. You hold all of those archives, and I wonder actually, with the technologies we have, whether it's just about making some of that information public, take the burden off yourself, finding ways to share it publicly, let it just be out there in the world so that we have these resources. But it is wonderful when people do say thank you very much. It is, and that's that's all part of the process, I suppose.
Something I have noticed amongst arts workers, I guess because not all of us culturally have that collectivist mindset. So most people in the arts and the visual arts are quite, would identify as progressive with a lot of their beliefs, but it doesn't necessarily mean they have a kind of collectivist mindset. So if they have a problem, they'll contact someone and want it sort of solved for them. And I found that a little bit hard sometimes, that I'll have people reach out and sort of want me to solve it. They're sort of unpaid, precarious worker myself, when sort of if we came together and we're all suffering the same issues, we could, in solidarity work on it. Or even just, I get really frustrated if people are in a job where they actually have access to a union. It's, here we are in the visual arts, if there's no union, we're killing for one. I wish we had one, but you might be, say in my workplace, work for a local government, there is a union, and it doesn't cost that much actually to join, and it's tax deductible and so on. And I'll have people, because they know I'm big on labour stuff, they'll come and I haven't got my super, they're not paying me for all my hours, and I'm like, well, there's a solution here. You just need to join the union. They'll literally fight for you. That's their role. But people think, I don't want to do that. Either they don't want to cause a fuss, or they don't want to pay the fee. And then if they do pay the fee, they think of it as a user pays system. But even a union is sort of, if your payment, you're not immediately using it. So, for instance, I'm not in strife at work at the moment, but I'm still paying my dues. Well, those dues are helping someone else. That's a union. So, and I am the union, and they are the union. So that sometimes I find in the arts a little bit frustrating. We want a hero to drag us out of things instead of let's together help each other.
Yeah, and that's again speaks to the ideology, the mythology that plays out in that ideology, and how that serves to try to eradicate collectivism. Look, I've paid my dues since I was 16 years old, first in engineering and then in academia, and it fascinates me just the same as you. That, as you say, there is a solution right there when people have grievances, and people who don't pay the dues, they just can't see the value in doing that. Whether it's short term or long term, and what's in it for me? It's it's ideological.
Yeah. What did the union ever do for me? Yeah.
If we were to think of the future, to be a little idealistic, how could we make it more of a collective endeavour?
So when I was meeting with this artist collective, and we were discussing and researching other countries and the ways that they approach artistic labour. So I suppose at the moment here, and this is an improvement from the previous government, but we've got the arts ministers trying to say that art is work and art should be paid properly and so on, and that's the kind of push. But then other countries, so say France, and I think they're trialling it in Ireland, look more at a kind of basic income model. So doesn't mean that you just sort of sit and get the payment and don't do anything. I mean, if you're a real artist, you you'll make whether you're being paid for it or not. It just means that these people who are, musicians, painters, ceramicists, actors, have a baseline amount of income that can pay like the basic necessities, and then you can kind of work on top of that. So yeah, like I met a ceramic artist who was getting this basic income in France, and then this musician I know here who's in this sort of punk band, he was saying, went over and toured in France and we're meeting all these other punk bands, and they're all getting the payment, and like not just the people in the band, but like, promoters, producers, like everything surrounding that, they can all get the payment, and they're quite proud to have the payment. It's not like, oh, you're getting, the dole or something. It's, oh, I get the artist payment because I'm recognized as a real artist, and the government, recognizes I'm contributing to society. So I think personally that's the best model. But it is good, at least here in Australia, at least artwork is starting to be recognised as real. I think as well, if you're on Centrelink, work related to art can now count towards mutual obligations. There's still a few problems there though, because I know if you're on a regular job seeker payment, you can get that apparently. But then if you're a person with a disability getting a job seeker payment, art doesn't count as work, which I think is really problematic because, of course, people with disabilities are allowed to have their artwork counted as work too. In an ideal future, I would prefer the kind of French or Irish model, but I think we are a little bit behind here, and we maybe don't value the arts as much as some countries in Europe do. So I think it's actually a really big deal. It was a really big deal to hear the Prime Minister and to hear Tony Burke say art is work and artists are workers and they should be paid. And Tony actually came to visit my exhibition because I kept tagging him and saying, come visit the show. If you think art is work, come visit the show. And then he actually came. He came to Coonahan Gallery, and then I showed him all the artworks and explained the issues through the art. And, I'm not generally a huge fan of politicians, but I did appreciate that it felt like he was listening. Whereas with the previous government, I think they removed the word arts from the portfolio. So it's sort of like trying to make the arts not exist.
No, it does seem to be a very progressive move with the new policy, and my own reading of it, and also the actions being taken, and I think that's really important. Is not just for things to be written or written down, but actually action to be taken, and so some of the issues you were talking about before, Madeleine, about the fact that there are working groups, high-level working groups now, talking about how can we address issues in arts work, how can we, be more equitable, more fair. How can we, and so the distribution of wealth, as you've just described in other nation states, that it would seem that we are making moves here in Australia towards these more progressive approaches, and finding us, as we always do here in Australia, finding our own solution to it for our own circumstances. So yeah, I do think it's a really, really great move, and I think there's acknowledgement also within it that there's a lot of work to be done. There are so many everyday practices normalized, accepted, and then a lot of people who, as you've pointed out, just don't understand their rights as workers, don't understand their identity as a worker. So even beyond rights, it's sort of just the basic everyday of what does it mean to be a worker. and what are you entitled to as such, and what could you be entitled to? So yeah, no, look, there is so much work to be done, and because that all of those things have been undone from the past, and in a very short space of time, only the last sort of 40, 50 years has it really been undone to this point. And so, yeah, to cast forward to a future where we can draw on lessons from elsewhere in the world, but also to support the sorts of progressive moves that are being made at a federal government level. It's so important. So, yeah, and I think the work that you do is really, at the grassroots, raising awareness, both with your fellow arts workers, with artists, with patrons of the arts, and with just everybody and anybody, being able to curate an exhibition where people like myself can just happen across it in Brunswick and come along and start to engage with work that actually speaks to a fundamental issue. I think that's so important, and so I encourage you to keep going, and let me know what I can do to help form another collective that can keep these things rolling.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks, Madeleine, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I look forward to perhaps talking again in the near future.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Connect, Curate, Create. I hope you found inspiration and insights that you can apply to your own creative work. For highlights and links, check out the show notes, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast player so you never miss an episode. Tune in next time as I continue to explore life and work in the arts.